Very pleased to welcome a new guest who is taking up a very important fight, Michael Kane from New York Teachers for Choice.org. Michael, how are you tonight?
Very good. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Well, I think you are representing a very important segment of professionals here in New York City. People who have been watching Crowdsource the Truth have been watching me document let's face it, is the rapid deterioration of our city. You're the first person we've spoken to in the educational field, and I'm really anxious to hear your point of view and to share with the Crowdsource the Truth audience your website, New York Teachers for Choice, and help everybody understand what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, so the website is nyteachersforchoice.org. That's all letters, no numbers there, nyteachersforchoice.org. And we are 100% in favor of choice for any and all medical procedures for any profession, for anybody. And we do not believe there should be medical mandates for anybody to keep their jobs. So, about 6 months before the COVID crisis hit New York and this country, I personally started a petition called New York Educators Against Vaccine Mandates. New York Teachers Against Vaccine Mandates for Educators. And it was 6 months before the COVID crisis. And I got a lot of interest. I told my colleagues and such. And they said to me, Michael, what vaccines are they going to make us take? And, now it's a year later, and now we know what the first vaccine, what
Right.
the first one will be. At the time, we didn't know. I didn't have a crystal ball. I was just following Albany. I was seeing what was going on. And for some reason, the Democratic supermajority in Albany right now has been really interested in passing more and more laws that take away our rights to decide what medical procedures we're involved in and to require them, especially for children, but also for adults as well, too. And people didn't really believe me when I was bringing this up. Now they do. Now everybody kind of gets it, and now everybody's paying attention and thinking about it. That petition has 5,000 signatures on it. Any American can sign that petition, but we especially urge teachers, union members, nurses, sanitation workers, food workers, police officers, firemen, because they're going to come after everybody. The teachers are really first on the chopping block. The nurses will probably be right there, and they're going to find reasons why everybody needs this to have a job. And one of the shocking things is that this is coming from our unions. Randy Weingarten is the head of the American Federation of Teachers. That's the umbrella group for my union, which is the United Federation of Teachers. The United Federation of Teachers, the New York City union, largest local union in the country, very powerful union. And Randy Weingarten recently said that she said we, I don't know who we is, because it's not me, but she said we are in favor of requiring the COVID vaccine for any in-person teacher.
The
So if you're
non-existent
in
COVID
person,
vaccine.
say
Not
that
even out
again.
yet. The
It
non-existent
doesn't
COVID
exist.
vaccine. Right.
It doesn't exist. And, that's a good point that you bring up, because Dr. Paul Offit was asked about this. Now, Dr. Paul Offit is one of the staunchest supporters of vaccination in the country and in the world. And he was asked if he would take the COVID vaccine. And he said, sight unseen, no. I mean, like, why would I agree right now to you to take a product that I don't see, that I don't know, that doesn't exist? It just defies all reason and logic. So it does seem to indicate that there's something else going on besides just what is best for the health and safety of teachers and students. I don't know what that something else is, but it indicates that there's something else, because the product doesn't exist yet. Our president is warp speeding this thing and wants it out by November 2nd, right? I mean, might be the fastest vaccine ever to come to market in the country. This is highly, highly questionable. I like to quote Dr. Offit there, because he is the creator and patent owner of the rotavirus vaccine, which is on the CDC schedule. It's given to just about every child in this country. He's a multimillionaire, from that
Hmm.
vaccine, and he is a staunch defender of the CDC vaccine schedule and of vaccines in general. Still,
But wait,
this
sorry,
guy is
Michael.
saying
What does rotavirus do? I don't know that I've. What is it?
the rotavirus. I'm not completely well versed on this, but rotavirus is a potential illness that a child can get if you a child will get that vaccine from age 0 to age 9 months. If the child does not receive it by 9 months, they can't receive it. And then it is, from my knowledge, from what I understand, it is then marked off as like a vaccine error if
Huh.
it isn't given, because it can actually cause problems for the child if it's not given in a certain window period.
Got it.
So it's a unique vaccine that is on the childhood schedule. But I don't know a lot about rotavirus itself and what it does. I do know Dr. Paul Offit knows a lot. He
He's the
made this
expert.
vaccine. He's a multimillionaire, and yet still this guy is telling us we should all be questioning the COVID vaccine because it doesn't exist yet, unless you're
And I
Randy
want to just pause
Weingarten,
you.
and unless
I
you're
just
a
want to pause you right
teacher.
there because a lot of people have been talking about these social media purges that have been going on. A lot of people who are friends with Crowdsource the Truth have been kicked off of Twitter, YouTube. Earlier this week, we had our Vimeo channel shut down. And one of the things that they say is that if you question vaccine safety, that could be grounds for removal. But here we are talking about the guy who is an MD. He's developed vaccines. He is the director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, and he is questioning. I wonder if he'll be removed from social media.
It's really, I don't think it's really that controversial of a thing for this specific vaccine right now, because we're saying very logical things. It doesn't exist yet. There's 100 of these COVID vaccines that are in experimental trials right now.
Wow.
They're rushing it quickly. And the history of vaccines that are similar to this is that they can cause something called immune enhancement. Now, that sounds like a good thing, but it's not. Immune enhancement is when a vaccine actually enhances your immune system to allow the virus to be successful at infecting you, and creates the exact opposite of what a
Wow.
vaccine is supposed to do. And that's not me saying that. Dr. Peter Hotez testified in front of Congress and said this, and had said that we need to be careful with coronavirus vaccines because we have had problems like this in the past, specifically with I believe it's the dengue vaccine. The yellow fever vaccine ended up causing this in large scale experiments in the Philippines, where a number of children got very ill and some even died. Actually, even Dr. Fauci referenced this in a press conference, saying that we need to be cautious and make sure immune enhancement doesn't happen with the COVID vaccine. And again, we have the top officials in the country that everyone is looking to for answers, that they trust them almost like it's a religion, as opposed to what science is supposed to be. Even those people are saying we need to be cautious about the COVID vaccine. So I don't understand why any union leader, labor leader, politician, anybody is saying we must take this thing. What thing? What thing are you saying we must take to keep our jobs? And also, lastly, on this point, Randy Weingarten's not going to have to take the COVID vaccine to keep her job.
Really?
She's not an in-person teacher, but her and other people that do not teach children are the ones that think they can make that decision for teachers. And NY Teachers for Choice is 100% opposed to that. I just want to make one last point on this. Any teacher who wants to get the COVID vaccine when it comes out, I feel should have quick, cheap, maybe free access to that vaccine. It's their choice to do. And if they and their doctor feel that's the best thing to do, I wholeheartedly support that, but not to keep your job.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with anything you've said so far. And I mean, again, even Dr. Fauci has been questioning vaccine safety. When Donald Trump says it's going to be ready in November, Fauci says, oh, no, 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 that won't be safe. It's got to be a vaccine when Fauci says it's a vaccine. So I think even questioning Fauci can get you somehow smashed. But you're speaking very sensibly, Michael. So that in and of itself might get us kicked off of social media, but whatever. At this point, we've got to do it because these are questions that are on people's mind, logical questions. How can they be discussing a mandate? What if the first Well, I don't even want to say that because they'll say, "Oh, Bill Gates wants to eliminate this vaccine hesitancy," while they're simultaneously, as you've described, proposing not only the most rapid development and deployment of a vaccine ever. I've heard quite a bit about this mRNA vaccine that's a whole new approach to inoculation that actually puts genetic material into your body that causes your cells to reproduce not copies of themselves, but copies of something that this vaccine thinks it should make and hasn't been tested on mammals or other animals at all. So we're all basically intended to be a big science experiment. Isn't that correct?
Well, that vaccine you speak about is Moderna's vaccine, and the mRNA platform for vaccines has never been widely distributed amongst humans. So if they end up approving that in this warp speed of 2 years, and then it gets deployed on 300 million Americans, on 7 billion people worldwide, that will be, by anyone's definition, a mass experiment, because we have no data not only on that Moderna COVID vaccine, but on any mRNA vaccine ever deployed on the population. So to be saying that we must take this to keep our jobs, I would go as far as agreeing with many lawyers who know a lot more than me that say that violates the Nuremberg Code, which calls for informed consent on any patient or subject involved in any medical procedure or test.
Mm. And that came up in a conversation between Del Bigtree, who I'm sure you're aware of or perhaps even in touch with, uh, and Alan Dershowitz. I believe you've
Yes.
seen my interview with Alan Dershowitz, in which he expressed the basically universally objected to opinion that the government actually has the right and the power to physically detain you and force you to be vaccinated if it so determines that that's for the greater good. Now, without saying anything about my personal opinion, I definitely think that teachers, your colleagues, and yourself are in the rare position of having a lot of people who are going to want to have input into what you can do with your body in the workplace, because you're going to be exposed to their children. And to play the devil's advocate, they have a point in as much as you are exposed to their children all day, every day, frankly, more than they are. And it does seem that parents, I could understand why they would want this input, but again, it's such a complicated and difficult situation.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is complicated. It is difficult. There's no easy answer that we could just say, hey, 1 + 1 is 2. We're done with this and can move on. I do agree with that. But there is many therapeutics that are showing to work quite well on this. Mainstream, big pharma ones, as well as natural ones. That we've had some time now to pass. The science is coming out. People are reviewing the science and seeing what can actually be done to treat this. So, despite what I'm hearing coming out of the mainstream media fairly exclusively, uh, COVID is not an untreatable illness. So I think we need to look at that. We also need to look at that. What are the death rates here? What is the real impact that is happening from COVID? We were all very, very scared in New York City. At the end of the winter, going into spring, March, and lockdowns, and all of these things were happening, and it was definitely a scary time. So perhaps not every decision that was made was the best, and I can understand that. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback. The fog of war can be difficult to make the correct decisions, but to continue to go with a failed policy, or to continue to insist things that you did were right when the science is coming out and pointing that they're not right, clouds our judgment and makes us think vaccine, 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 vaccine. And I think this is uh not a failure of imagination, but you know all of us have egos. All of us are really fragile when it comes down to it, and sometimes it's hard to say, I was incorrect on this, I was correct on this, I was incorrect on this, we need to change it, I'm sorry. Right? That's a very difficult thing, especially for people that are in high positions of power. It's not easy to do. But those
Yeah.
who do it, I really admire, and I hope some people can do that, so that that's how we'll make the best decisions, right? Is if we can do that. Otherwise, we're going to make more failed policy.
Yes, just doubling down on failed policy. And I know, you've got somewhat of a political uh, role to play as the founder of New York Teachers for Choice.org, and also as someone who is in a union and someone who has a job. You can't just necessarily say whatever you want if it would put that job in jeopardy. But I'm here to say that somebody that you're talking about who I really object to, who refuses to admit that he's wrong and in fact thinks he's so right that he should be telling other people how to basically destroy the largest cities in the world. I'm talking about Andrew Cuomo. He's written a book about leadership. It seems like he's got multiple books about leadership, so I'm having a hard time finding it. Lessons in Leadership, I think it's called.
Yeah,
This is a guy.
The thing
Sorry.
on that book for me is I felt like from all the daily briefings we saw, he was really, really busy. It's kind of shocking to me that he found time to write a book. I'm actually really,
Yes.
really kind of blown away by that.
Yeah. Well, I, like you, find that somewhat incredulous. Incredible. I'm incredulous. That's incredible. He is full of bull. There's no way he wrote this book. Someone probably ghost wrote it for him. But the fact that he's out there on television promoting his book and having the audacity to think that he is able to provide leadership lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic. The only thing we can learn from his leadership is how to not do this. You spoke about the teachers union. In my observations around New York City, one of the very first sets of people to be back to work that I was able to observe in New York City were the electricians and carpenters unions building these makeshift hospitals over at the Javits Center that basically never got used. They were so underutilized. I think there's no question that it was an absolute waste of resources and money. And then on the flip side, we hear that there are people who are underserved because of not enough resources and not enough money. And somehow that's Donald Trump's fault. 200,000 people dead. That's his fault. How do decisions made at the gubernatorial level affect what's happening with the teachers union and your organization? Or do they?
Well, so one of the I think Governor Cuomo did some things right and did some things wrong. I'm not going to comment too much on the specifics of that. I think there's a lot of discussion around that going on by people like yourself and others. I think there's a very healthy debate and dialogue going on with that. I'm not going to comment on that. One thing I will comment on is that on May 5th, um, as we were still in the midst of lockdowns and crisis in New York City and New York State, especially New York City, Governor Cuomo came on TV and wondered out loud why we still teach children in person in buildings when we have so much
Did he
technology.
really say that?
Oh, yeah, he did. And that's when he rolled out his Reimagine education platform. The Reimagine education platform is essentially reimagining education at a distance. That's basically what it is. And he announced that day he partnered with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to advise him and others moving
And Eric
forward.
Schmidt.
Oh, that's right. Eric, I don't know if Eric Schmidt is on the education, but he is doing Eric Schmidt, of Alphabet, is also involved in reimagining the economy of
And
New
forgive
York
me for
State, especially New York
interrupting, but do
City.
you find it coincidental that tech giants who have all of the software and hardware and various things to sell to families so that their students' educations can be upgraded with modern technology would seem to stand to financially benefit from this? Is that weird to
Well,
you?
it's not weird. It sounds exactly like what they would want to do. I mean, actually just makes perfect sense to me. And then there needs to be the debate of, is this better or is it not better? That was on May 5th when Governor Cuomo made that announcement. May 6th, he backtracked because the outpouring against it was big. And a lot of people had said, you can never replace in-person education. We can't have remote learning do what we need to do for our children. And he said, oh, yeah, of course, that's correct. Kind of, he said, that's what I really meant, was that. But the cat's out of the bag. I mean, he said it. He said it strongly. He said it on his daily briefings, where he had a national, maybe international platform.
Yeah.
And then so he did make this reimagined panel, and on that panel are members of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's some stakeholders who belong there. I don't think there's too many teachers. I don't think there's too many parents. There are some that are on there, but also on that panel is Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, who recently said all in-person teachers need to get the COVID vaccine to remain teaching. And it's interesting, as we all know, that perhaps the number one promoter of the COVID vaccine on the planet today is Bill Gates. He's a very big supporter of it financially and rhetorically, and he's done a lot to promote it. So Randy Weingarten is definitely friendly with Bill and Melinda Gates for sure.
Really?
Yeah, she wouldn't deny that. I mean, she's had a relationship with the Gates Foundation for years. Yeah.
Interesting. So you see, I mean, this is my speculation, but what I see happening, Michael, is that including people I've spoken directly to, like Alan Dershowitz, they say, well, there's no mandate for the vaccine. You don't have to take it. You could sit in your apartment alone with no job, no ability to socialize with other people, no ability to use mass transit, airplanes, trains, no ability to go into a retail store. That's your choice. But if you want a job, if you want to buy anything, if you want to go anywhere, you're going to need to somehow prove that you've been vaccinated. So they could be, this is speculation, we're not saying they're doing this, they could be saying, hey, look, it's no problem. If you want to teach students in a school building, you've got to be inoculated. If you want to sit in front of a computer screen and never interact with another person, then you don't need the vaccine. Michael, what do you think about the generation of, because I see people of all ages walking around New York City wearing the mask. I get kind of sad when I see young children. I think somebody who's maybe like 5, if you think back to when you were a child, you start doing something when you're 5 and get conditioned to do it. We're going to have a generation of essentially socially illiterate people who never know how to gauge the expression on somebody's face, never know the kindness of a smile from a stranger, never directly interact. I mean, isn't a huge portion of early days of school the social interaction and the social education that children get just from being around each other?
Yeah, socialization is extremely important in education. Whether you're in a building or homeschooling or whatever you choose to educate your child, socialization is a major function of education. Perhaps the most important, really, beyond learning how to think is one thing that's important that hopefully we can do in schools. But learning how to socialize, learning how to, like you said, those cues are so important. I want to make one point about our organization. New York Teachers for Choice does not hold any position on masks. We don't have a pro or con position on it. We have people that are on our steering committee or are part of our organization that support mask wearing all the time, that support mask wearing sometimes, and absolutely are against wearing a mask anytime. So that's something that we don't hold an organizational position on. One thing I'll say about it is I'd really love to see more real science put out there. There's a number of prominent scientists out there that are saying they want to see a randomized, double-blind, or as blind as possible placebo study on masks. There are
Right.
some scientists saying it would be immoral to do that study, because if somebody was not wearing the mask, you're denying them the ability to have protection, right? So this is the debate. This is the dialogue that's going on. But one thing I'll say for sure is I would really love to see more science on it, because there's one study that was done a couple years back that's excellent, that shows that the science there showed that surgical masks are better than cloth masks. And they did this with medical professionals. And if you notice, you never see medical professionals wearing cloth masks, right? You never go to the
Bandanas.
doctor.
No.
Right. You don't see that at all. And they had, in this one study, they had found that if the medical professional was wearing a cloth mask, they were 3 times more likely to get a respiratory infection compared to the medical professional that was wearing a surgical mask, because you wear it 20 minutes, maybe an hour, you throw it out. The cloth masks can harbor filth. And
Right.
this is something that I've talked about with educators as well too. How do we tell kids that have to wear masks? How do we monitor if their mask has been cleaned, if they're wearing it
Right.
2, 3 days in a row? Kids have, issues like
Bad
this.
hygiene sometimes.
Right. So for me, the main thing on masks is we don't have a organizational position on it, but I'd love to see real science and more of a dialogue, and not so much this people attacking each other and yelling at each other. And I feel like that's almost like some sort of a weird psyop of just dividing the people over this. We
Well,
need real science and real discussion. We don't need people like taking camps and you're an anti-masker and you're anti-science. And it's horrible to see.
absolutely. And I mean, I've been seeing it firsthand on the street. People feel it's their obligation to tell other people what to do with their own bodies, even when you're outside. If you actually believed, and if it is even correct, that somebody walking, like in other words, when someone's walking down the street outside, smoking a cigar or a cigarette, you can't really go up to them and say, "Hey, put that cigarette out." If they're outside, they're outside. There's no law against smoking a cigarette outside. If you don't like it, you just walk away from it. But why go up to someone and engage with them if they're not wearing a mask and you want them to? Let me ask you this, Michael. What subject do you teach and what age are the students?
Yeah, I teach middle and high school, and I'm a special education teacher.
Hmm. And so what has the feedback, are students, what's the status now? You're teaching in person or what?
So New York City made a bold move to try to be the only major city in America to reopen in September. All the other major cities went 100% remote. And
Hmm.
so this created major divisions throughout the city and major fights. I actually agreed with the decision to try to open up. For special education students, remote learning was horrible. It was so tough, um, that there's so many needs of a student that has various disabilities, to then try to meet all of those needs the way you and I are talking right now. It just doesn't work out. So I was excited that we were going to be going back and trying to do that, but things really did not go off well in New York City, and that's not a controversial statement at all. And one of the things that happened is we are short on staff by about between 4 to 10,000 teachers right now. And the way contracts and things got negotiated, you will have in many schools, you will have students showing up, maybe anywhere from 20% to 50% of the entire population of the school, or even less. They show up, they go into rooms, and they learn remotely still. They're not
What?
even taught in person
And
because of
why
the
is that?
staffing issues.
The teachers don't want to
Because
come in themselves or what?
so then there was that issue as well too. There's a number of teachers who have gotten various medical waivers, and they're
Hmm.
not coming into school for a number of reasons of conditions they have that were approved by the CDC. So and fear, and quite honestly, you have a lot of fear from everybody, where parents don't want to send their kids in, teachers don't want to go in. So you add all of that stuff together. Um, there was is a very tough situation to make in-person learning in New York City happen in a way that was beneficial for kids. Now, I'm not saying it's not happening anywhere, because every single school is different. Every school has different issues that they're struggling with. But overall, from what I've seen, I've been following a lot of things on Twitter. I've been following public officials' accounts as well too. Mark Traeger is city councilman who from Brooklyn, who's been really following this issue. And he's just been really putting out a lot of negative stuff about what's been going on. So it's not a secret that New York City is struggling. Everybody knows that we are struggling to try to do it and to attempt the in-person learning. But now we have over 50% of all New York City kids are fully remote because they
Wow.
have opted out of the hybrid model. So a hybrid meant that you were taught in person 2 or 3 days a week, or one day a week, not a full in-person education. We didn't do that in New York City, and the hybrid models made a lot of different problems for a number of reasons. So
Logistical
uh,
problems or health problems?
Well, logistical. I don't. I have not really seen health problems. Um, but in terms of health issues, there's testing that's being done, and this is a really important issue I'd like to talk to you about. There is mandatory COVID testing in New York City schools now for
Hmm.
students and for teachers. That just started October 9th or so, something like that. And so, as teachers, we were told by our union that if we do not consent and we refuse to take an in-person COVID test in school, we will be placed on unpaid leave. So this is an extremely problematic situation. And I've spent the past month really delving into it and trying to get some answers. And surprisingly, no one wanted to answer, especially my toughest questions about this. And we had to do some action alerts to try to get answers. Most
What
recently,
was the toughest
uh,
question?
the toughest question is the testing being done in schools. The New York City has contracted with a company called Fulgent Genetics, and we're using the Fulgent Genetic test in New York City schools. Fulgent Genetics owns a proprietary library of genetic information.
Ooh,
So
they're
that
keeping
is a
your
library.
genetic information.
Well, they already have a whole bunch. I don't know how they came across that. I don't know how they harvested that, but they have it. I know that because I came across it in a 2017 SEC filing from Fulgent Genetics. So if you go to nyteachersforchoice.org and you go click on updates and go through our articles there, there's a number of places where I've linked to that 2017 SEC filing. Um, so they own that. That's not controversial. No one will deny it. That they're a capitalist biotech company making money off
You
of
mean the
their.
fact that they own it is not in
Yeah,
controversy?
right.
Them
That's not
having it is quite controversial because we don't know what they're going
well.
to do with it.
So so maybe it is, maybe it's not. There's a number of good things they could be doing with this catalog. But my question is, because this is just logical. If you're making me swab for a COVID test, I'm now handing you my DNA.
Right.
So I'm giving my DNA over to Fulgent Genetics. So my question was, in the contract you signed with this biotech company, do they have the right to catalog my DNA and student DNA as well?
Wow.
And crickets, crickets from everybody. My union wouldn't answer the question. City councilman wouldn't answer the question. Mayor de Blasio wouldn't answer the question. Chancellor Carranza, head of schools in New York City, wouldn't answer the question. So the latest step that we've taken is we filed an official complaint with the public advocate office with Jumaane Williams, and I thank Jumaane Williams and his office for taking that complaint. They took it from me on Tuesday at 1 p.m. over the phone. Karen Jones spoke to me and verbally I gave it to her and she wrote it down. So I appreciate that. We continue to follow up with that. If anybody goes to nyteachersforchoice.org, you'll see at the top of our website, we have a little action alert to say thank you to Jumaane Williams and his office for taking our complaint and to let him know that you will be following our website for updates on what is coming of that complaint. And we filed that complaint because nobody will answer our question. The head of my union, Michael Mulgrew, very powerful man in New York, we had hundreds, maybe thousands of people email him and call him. He has not given an answer. The only thing he did do recently was, I believe this was last night, at the delegate assembly for the UFT. So a delegate assembly is where representatives from each school, the chapter leader and the union delegates, get together and they hear Mike Mulgrew speak, maybe ask some questions. So there was a virtual Zoom one done last night. Michael Mulgrew said, there is nothing nefarious happening with DNA. Now, that is kind of meaningless because at
Yes.
least my organization, everyone I'm involved with, we never accused anyone of doing anything nefarious with DNA. In fact, Fulgent Genetics, if they do anything with our DNA, the only reason they would do anything with it is because they were contractually allowed to do it. So therefore, it would not be nefarious. It wouldn't be criminal. It wouldn't be wrong by any measure. So by he addressed it, but he didn't address our question. Our question remains: does Fulgent Genetics have the right to catalog teacher and student DNA when they get swab samples from us for in-school COVID testing in New York City. No one's answered us yet.
And so what do they do when they test you? Have you had one of these tests yet?
No, what they would do is they take a Q-tip swab, they put it in your nose, they run it
Ah,
around. They said they don't go deep, which is important, especially for children and disabled children as well too. Parents are upset about this because parents are saying that they want to be there. They're saying they want their own
yes.
private doctor to do the
Yeah.
test. They don't want to do it there, and the city's saying no. So parents, and
Wow.
actually, this just broke today. There's a an assemblyman from Staten Island who's just started tweeting saying that there are multiple students in Staten Island who were given COVID tests and the parents did not sign the consent form. And he said that there's an
Ooh.
investigation going into that right now. So that's a big controversy
So now we've
ready to
got a
happen.
situation where potentially private companies can be doing medical testing and
Yes.
saving data about people's children. I mean, I think it's important for people to keep in mind that until about 1950, what, four, I don't think they even knew anything about DNA. And now we've got a company that's going to save it up. So if your kid is 7, 8, 10 in school, their DNA gets stored. When that child is 50, can some corporation clone them and start selling copies? I mean, we don't know. Certainly, when I was a kid, if you broke out an iPhone in school, it would seem like something beyond it would be beyond what they had in Star Trek. The notion, and we've already had mammalian cloning or whatever, the
But yeah,
sheep and the,
yeah.
so it's not that
Right, right. So,
far-fetched.
so that's true. Right. So we don't know. I mean, we don't know 5, 10, 20 years. We don't know what DNA will be worth. These DNA libraries and catalogs have high monetary value. There's no question about that. Um, I can tell you something that we do know. We do know that if your DNA is in a private proprietary library that sells them to third parties, which most of them do, sell the information to third parties. If you're applying for insurance
They can
and that
check your
insurance
DNA
company
and deny it based on your
that that
propensity to
that
get
is
some disease.
that is currently a reality and now not often, it's not often happening, but I just read this in the New York
Ooh.
Times the other day that is possible. So if a company owns a legitimate legal DNA catalog, they have the rights to sell and do what they want with that. So there are some very, so even though there is nothing nefarious about our DNA being stored in a proprietary catalog, what is done with it, even if it is legal, could have really far-reaching implications on all of us. Plus, as you said, who knows what's going to happen with DNA 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now. And those catalogs will remain for all of that time.
Absolutely. I mean, not to mention, there was recently a report. I mean, I absolutely agree. I would not want anybody doing anything medical to my child. I don't have any kids, but if I did, without me being present and knowing what their qualifications were, there was a report just earlier this month, the first report of cerebral spinal fluid leaking out of
Oh,
someone's
God.
nose when this swab went too far up the nose. Now, that could lead to a brain infection and death. And although perhaps it's a low likelihood of occurrence, guess what? If nobody's jamming a Q-tip up your nose, I think it's an even lower likelihood.
Well, so I'll say that New York City isn't using a deep swab, so that was smart of them to not do that. However, especially with kids with disabilities, you don't know how an autistic child or a kid that has physical spasms, you don't know how they're going to react or be in these situations. And the person that'll be giving this test is a trained individual. It's not a doctor. It's not a
Uh-huh.
nurse in New York City. It's a trained individual. So I don't understand. And I've been talking to lawyers. I mean, I'm talking to multiple lawyers, and most lawyers are agreeing with a lot of things I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't understand why there's no reasonable accommodation given to students and teachers who say, I don't want to stand in a gym with a trained individual and a Q-tip. I want to do it at my doctor's office.
Right.
We'll release the data. We'll submit what the results are. But none of this is happening. And plus, since they won't answer my question about Fulgent genetics, it's just making so much lack of trust build up for me and for dozens, hundreds of teachers and parents just like me.
No, I agree. I mean, the points you're raising, Michael, they just seem so obvious. Before we continue the conversation, I just want to make sure that people know your organization is New York Teachers for Choice, and people can learn more about it by going to nyteachers, FOR choice.org, right?
Yeah, that's it.
And so can people, even if they're not in New York, because I like what you're talking about, is there a way for us to support this organization?
Oh, that's great. I'm glad that you said it. This has to go national. It will. It will. But all I could do is organize where I'm at for right now. Um, uh, People need to be, I would suggest, model off of what we're doing. Reach out to me. I would gladly like to walk people through the steps I took that worked, things that didn't work, and what you need to do to organize yourself in your area. Because even currently, vaccine mandates in America come from the state. There's nothing about vaccination or about medicine, basically, in the Constitution. So therefore, it defaults to the state. It is a state right to make the rules. However, we have seen signs at the federal level of legislation being introduced that's linked to school funding, right? So this is similar to when there was remember there was linkage to funding. You had to have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit in your state. Otherwise, you weren't getting fundings for roads and infrastructure projects from the
Right.
federal government. Well, a couple years back in the federal government, they floated vaccinate every child. Otherwise, you won't get federal school funding. So it's kind of a workaround to try to take away the state's rights from this. So nothing came of that. It was just floated a few years back. But I do anticipate, and a lot of people anticipate, with the coming COVID vaccine, we're going to see something more federal, or if not that, we're going to see multiple states acting at the same time in the same way. So my point just is, this isn't just a New York thing. It's not just New York City. We're seeing the testing, the COVID testing coming in New York City first. It's in other places as well too. And it's that first step of medical procedures coming into the workplace and being a requirement for you to stay employed. I want to say one other thing. I'm not against testing, and I'm not against New York City putting out a testing regime to try to stay safe. I really believe New York City and the union are doing the best they can to try to figure out how to make things safe. But the way they've rolled it out is instilling no trust in me, no trust in hundreds of teachers that I know, and no trust in hundreds of parents that I know as well too. They needed to do this in a different way to get me to buy in. Right now, I'm not buying in. Right now, I'm asking questions, and they're not getting answered. So they're just pushing me as a teacher further and further away from
Yeah.
where they were hoping to bring me into. So
Well, I think a lot of regular people who aren't teachers feel the same way. I mean,
yeah,
we started this whole thing out with them telling us that it was, holy cow, this is, millions of people are going to die. We got to just shut everything down for 2 weeks to get a handle on this, slow the spread. And then, if they had done that and after 2 weeks they said, okay, it seems like if you're not susceptible to viral infections, it might be okay to go outside and stay with your job and all this kind of thing. They just shut everything down. They kept it shut down. Businesses around are closing. The average person on the street, in my conversations and people that I know who are contacting me, people feel that this is not going well. We're hearing about increases in cases while there's simultaneous decreases in death. I mean, the fact of the matter is, how long have you been a school teacher, Michael?
over 13 years.
So it's a long time. And, you see these flu season, there's a certain number of kids who are out. You start to get a feel for, okay, everybody's going to start getting the flu this year. Kids are in close quarters. They're sharing snacks.
Yep.
They're sneezing on each other. They're picking noses and flicking at each other. People get sick in a school, right?
Yeah.
And you could
Yes.
probably have some sense of, oh, this year was more flu, kind of less flu. But this is a fact of life. People get sick. I mean, you walk outside, you could trip and fall and break your arm. We cannot and never have had this society where everybody is so protected. We had an excellent question in the chat. If it is so dangerous and contagious that me walking on Fifth Avenue without a covering on my face is a threat to some obnoxious woman half a block away from me. Why do they stick a Q-tip up your nose? Can't they just wipe a cotton ball on your tongue, and if you've got it, they're getting tons of saliva that would have samples?
Well, there's a lot of problems with the testing as well too. There's been false positive rates have been really tragic. The New York Times dropped a bombshell in August when they reported up to 90% of positive COVID tests are false positives. We also had the NFL had 77 positive cases in their testing, but they retested all of those samples again. And the NFL has very expensive testing protocols, and all 77 were false positives. That's 100%
77.
false positive rate. Yeah. And the NFL, like I said, has very expensive testing protocols. So that second tier of testing is very expensive. They're not doing any second tier of testing, for New York City teachers or for students.
Right.
They're just going to err on the side of caution and say, no, you tested positive. You're going to quarantine for 10 to 14 days. You're not going to come to work. We'll still pay you. You're going to learn remotely or whatever it is. The testing has a lot of issues. I want to talk to your other point, though. You had brought up about the lockdowns.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. It was either yesterday or today that the World Health Organization just came out saying they do not recommend nations using lockdowns as their go-to to deal with coronavirus or COVID. This is a game changer. This is a total game changer. The World Health Organization was recommending lockdowns and shutting down societies. What the World Health Organization is now saying is that all they know for sure that lockdowns do is beat up and hurt and even cause death to the poorest people in those countries. Now, this goes back to a point you brought up earlier. We did some things right, we did some things wrong dealing with COVID. Here's the World Health Organization basically doing, I commend them for this. This is what they should be doing now. They should be saying, we made a mistake.
But I don't know if they actually said that, though, did they? Because now there's backpedaling. I might, and, listen, you and I have never met or spoken very much before today. I don't know if you think I'm a conspiracy theorist or what, but my feeling is that when they come out with these, if I'm, whatever I'm doing, if I'm in class listening to a teacher, if I'm on a movie set taking directions from a director, if a cop tells me to do something, the cop tells me, follow me, and I follow him, and then he turns around and says, what the hell are you doing? I say, you just told me to follow you. That makes the interaction very uneasy and does not, as you said, foster trust. It just makes me think I'm dealing with somebody who either doesn't know what they're doing or can't make up their mind or is deliberately trying to confuse me.
No, that's a good point. I do, and I think your larger point there is that the World Health Organization lacks legitimacy, and I think there's truth to that because I agree that there's truth to that for sure. But as an organization that fosters a ton of power and control on this planet, we do look to them to see what they say to then see where the narrative's going, and I think that is important.
Let me ask you something real quick about the WHO, because I got a lot of questions about it. You're familiar with this guy, right?
Yes.
Tedros Adhanom. He's the Director General of the WHO. Did you know much about his past, what his role was in government in Ethiopia?
Just a little bit. Enlighten me, please.
Well, he was the health minister of Ethiopia, and I believe he was the foreign minister as well. And he is from an ethnic minority and a political party called the Tigray, which is a Marxist communist group that they ruled Ethiopia at the time. And what Tedros did in his role as the health minister was he reclassified a cholera outbreak as acute watery diarrhea syndrome in a region where the ethnic majority, his political opponents, lived. And by doing that, it denied the children UN funding and medicine and caused a lot of children to die. So this guy is a notorious scumbag who uses his political power against his political enemies and is a totally dishonest, unelected war criminal, basically. And I resent and object to political leaders from communist countries having influence over this country, my life, your students, people's kids. This is the most absurd theater of nonsense we have ever been subjected to, in my opinion. And the fact that they're flip-flopping every day, I mean, listen, if the New York Times and the World Health Organization come forward and say, hey, wait a minute, we realize 90% of what we said is wrong, the exact opposite of what we've been telling you to do for the past 8 months is right, why are we still listening to them at all? If a student got 90% of the questions on a test wrong, would you say, let's give this student an A and put them at the head of the class, or what?
I think you make some really, really powerful points there. I also, in this context, too, of the World Health Organization saying this, we also had 6,000 scientists recently sign a declaration against lockdown. 6,000 is a large number. That's a large number of scientists. And I'm very interested in that. And I find it interesting that that happened. And very soon after that, the World Health Organization seemed to throw a bone towards that. Also, I'll say this, Sweden's health minister, the guy that set up their situation there, which did not use masks, did not lock down, but did use distancing. They did. And the Swedes are actually naturally socially distant people, from what I've heard, that like they're not like Italians, they're not hugging and kissing and stuff. So it was easy for them to have some distance. The health minister that came up with that as largely now being seen as he might have gotten something right. And he was promoted in the World Health Organization just about a month ago. So I wonder, I haven't followed this closely, but I wonder if he's having some impact. I wonder if his data of what's going on in Sweden had some impact. And then the World Health Organization, whose legitimacy is in question, is forced to some degree to acknowledge maybe we need to shift something. But you do make a good point about if someone says follow you and you follow them and they say, what are you doing?
Well, and then the other day,
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I agree. A lot of what I've heard about Sweden has been positive, but I feel like anytime a guest mentions that, I go and look. This is Time magazine. I believe they're the same guys who showed a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald standing there with a rifle in his backyard. But they're saying the response is a disaster. How is it a disaster? I mean, there's more people dead in New York State than all of China, and Andrew Cuomo is writing books about leadership. Unless there's more people dead in Sweden than in New York, they're better than Cuomo.
So statistics is a tricky one, right? You could play numbers in so many different ways. The main complaint I've heard about Sweden, and when people say it was a disaster and it was negative,
No, it's the
main complaint
furniture.
I see. What's that?
That IKEA furniture, it's terrible.
No, the big complaint that I see is they say some of Sweden's neighbors had lower death rates or overall lower death numbers than Sweden did. But from everything I've seen, those numbers, those differences are statistically insignificant. And also they're looking at a very narrow period of time. A lot of what I've seen and heard is that you need to look very long in terms of what's happening. You can't just look like, with this small period of time, we had more deaths than the 3 countries that border us, but you're not looking at the entirety of it. So again, statistics is something that can be manipulated. Numbers can be manipulated.
Obviously, yes,
say whatever
you're
it is
absolutely
that you
correct.
want to say.
We've looked at this map quite a bit, and it's just absolutely terrible from a navigation standpoint. The fact that you can't sort this. Here we go. So in Sweden, they're telling us 5,910 people dead. And
Is that totals? Is that the
that's
total?
the total. Yeah, that's the total number of dead in Sweden out of 100,000 infected. Now, if we go to the United States, so that's 6,000 dead people in Sweden. And in the United States, we have a guest who's an expert at using this map. He's taught me quite a bit about it. So in New York, where are we here? Global recovered daily cases.
New York's total deaths, is that what you're looking for? That's around 35,000, I believe.
So that seems to be about 5 to 6 times more than Sweden. And the Sweden population, just real quick here, I want to get an A today, Michael. Sweden has 10.23 million people in it, and I believe New York is something like 19 million. So we're talking
That's
about
correct.
5 times the number of dead people in New York. I think Sweden is bigger than New York, and it sounds like whatever they're doing is a lot better than what we're doing in New York.
I think so. I think so. And I'm open to other perspectives and to debate on this, but there hasn't been enough of the other perspectives and debate on this. There's been so much of just marching orders of what we must do, which is not science. I mean, it's just simply not science. Science is about questioning, it's about debate, it's about asking questions, it's about challenge. That's what it's about. It's not about, well, Fauci said it, so it must be true. No, you can't do that. Maybe some things he said are true. Maybe he got some things wrong just because of the data he was looking at. Maybe he lied. So there's all of that you need to take into account. You can't just follow one thing. That's not science. It just isn't. So I hope just moving forward, we see more robust conversations. I love seeing Fauci and Rand Paul debate in the Senate. It's fantastic to me. That's some of the best television that I think is produced out there is when I see that, because I love to see them go at it. They're two very intelligent men. They're both MDs, right? And I feel like I learned so much just in how they go at each other. Why is that, like, we're not supposed to do that in America anymore?
Well,
I don't
and
get it.
again, this is what I'm saying we are potentially risking just by even discussing this in social media. They could say, oh, you're challenging public health policy. The one thing we might slightly disagree on is that in a conversation between Anthony Fauci and Rand Paul, there's definitely one intelligent man there, and it's not Anthony Fauci. But just going back to the New York, Sweden thing for a second. So let's say New York has 2x the population. So let's cut this death number in half. Let's call it 16,000 dead in New York in this time frame. And Sweden, where did we have that COVID map?
Sweden was between 5 and
6.
6.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're still talking about 1/3. So it would seem to me the whole premise of science is to constantly challenge conclusions and add new information and expand your knowledge, not just say, Andrew Cuomo, he's the leader, give him a book deal, get him on television with Gayle King promoting the book, and order all these hotspots to close because he obviously knows what he's doing. If we're getting, 3 times worse the result in New York than we got in Sweden, why isn't every epidemiologist in New York going to Sweden, studying the blood of Swedish people, studying who recovered, studying who died? I mean,
Right.
if this is a worldwide, situation, we're handling it terribly.
Well, I appreciate all of the scientists and doctors who have spoken up, because a lot of them are out there. They're saying what they know. They're putting their challenge out there. We don't get to see them on mainstream news enough, or sometimes even at all. And that's a pity. But that's why your show exists. That's why the internet exists, at least for now, for us to be out there and looking for this stuff. And I encourage people to go out there, make up your own minds. Don't believe me. Don't believe Jason. Check out our stuff and think and debate. And if you think you're so sure about something, go find the person that says you're wrong, and then and engage in that. I feel like we're so fragile as a society now. We can't be told we were wrong. I was wrong. Oh my God. We need to get over that. Otherwise, what's going to happen to our republic? What's going to happen to our society?
Well,
We're
what's
seeing
happened
the
to it
divisions. We're
already?
seeing what's happening in the streets and what's going on.
Yes.
It's a very frightening thing.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but it's a very valid conversation, and you're raising a lot of points that are really resonating with me. And there was just one other image I wanted to show you. This data scientist that we do a regular show with, John Cullen, he's really uncovered a ton of important information. I don't know if you've had a chance to see his show, but
No, I haven't.
yeah, he's brought out a lot of very good evidence along the lines of what we're talking about, just, plumbing the depths of the CDC's own website. I mean, we're not questioning things. We're looking at data and just sort of saying, how does this add up? So Laura Ingraham, one of the anchors on Fox News, the Ingraham angle. She posted one of John Cullen's charts asking the question, why are schools and universities closed? Because according to the CDC's own data, from the start of this pandemic until September 24th, when this chart was created, the students that you're dealing with, age 5 to 14, this is across the entire United States. Can you see the number of COVID deaths from that? It's 31, Michael.
Oh,
It's 31 out of 188,000.
well, I feel like this has been one of the blessings of the COVID crisis is that babies and the young and those under 10, for whatever reason it is, have been spared. This hasn't come down on them. And anytime I've seen any of those headlines, 8-year-old dies of COVID and any of that, if you read past the headline, maybe to the 8th paragraph of stuff, you always find something that doesn't quite add up. Yeah, I think there were a couple. I think there were a couple of deaths. There were a handful of deaths that were accounted to COVID. 31, for this whole thing that was said. But if you compare that with just the flu, with just common colds and such, that's why I think that's one of the blessings of this is that it has not hit the young. And I think that speaks to especially elementary schools, especially need to be open. I think New York City has done somewhat of a decent job at trying to do that. I wish they would have gone full open for elementary. They did a hybrid model. But yeah, I agree completely with that from everything I've read as well too. Under 10, children under 10. And also even the data seems to show that they're not spreading it. There's
Yeah,
no data showing it's spreading in schools. That's much more of a headline and fear thing than any real raw science that I've seen so far.
I agree with you. Well, Michael, we're just about out of time for tonight. I want to remind people that they can learn more about your organization, New York Teachers for Choice, by going to nyteachers.choice.org. They can contact you through the website and read all of your updates. What you're doing is extremely important, and obviously, Michael, you are creating the future of the United States, educating the children of New York. So you are really on the front lines there, and this is something that requires a lot of attention from everybody. And there's just so many different angles to this coronavirus pandemic. Anything else you want to say before we wrap it up tonight?
All I want to do is thank you, Jason, for having us on. It's not easy to get this information out there. I've been on a couple of other shows, but all with people that are brave like you to take on contrarian views and to allow something as dangerous as free speech to
I
actually
know.
really happen. So thank you so very much for it. We appreciate the platform.
It's my pleasure to do it, and I hope the platform remains. Viewers who are watching us right now can help me keep Crowdsource the Truth alive, even if YouTube, Facebook has already removed us last week, Michael. So we've lost thousands of viewers, and I'm getting a couple of emails from people who are asking if they've, somehow insulted me because why did I unfriend them on Facebook? I did not unfriend anybody. Facebook unfriended me. Not just removing allegedly, offensive videos. They've just totally deleted my personal Jason Goodman account. I can no longer communicate with certain friends who are international and everything. I mean, this is literally like the phone company saying, hey, we object to that phone call you had with Michael Kane. You're not allowed to use the phone anymore. And they just turn it off. So people can help support.
They claim they're not publishers. They claim they're
Right.
not making editorial decisions, and they maintain this protective status because of that. And meanwhile, they're just knocking off whoever they don't want to hear from. It's crazy.
Absolutely. And David is with us in the comments reminding people they can now see Crowdsource the Truth on banned.video, BANNED.video. Alex Jones of InfoWars was generous in giving us that opportunity to appear there. People can also support this channel on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. The sponsor exclusive videos have been slightly disrupted. New videos will be coming out on the normal schedule, but the back catalog is going to be restored once I establish the custom-built Crowdsource the Truth exclusive program server. That's going to be coming in the next few days. All of the library will be restored. Vimeo deleted our account because they didn't like what we were talking about. So this is happening all over the place, and there was a huge purge on YouTube today. But Michael, I want to thank you for your bravery. Some people who want you to speak out in a way that's perhaps, I don't know, more in line with their thinking. I want those people to understand that Michael participates in a union. He's got somewhat of a political role to play himself, and that he can't just publicly represent himself. He needs to arrive at an idea that can be the best solution to satisfy the most needs of an extremely complicated problem that a lot of people have a lot of input into. So, Michael, I appreciate the limb that you're going out on, and I definitely would like to have you back in the future so we can continue talking about this and monitoring this situation as it develops.
Thank you so much. We'd love to come back again.
Excellent. And thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.